Well, that's about it for the day. Snow's coming down. Guess I'll call it a day. Wrap it up. Got some consultations done and all my right to trip. What? Oh, one more right to travel? Okay, that's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. One more only because you, and you know who you are, mentioned Alaska in the comments section. After this, I'm not doing it anymore. I've already covered some of the hardest states, and now we're getting to some of the easiest states, which is why I don't mind doing Alaska as the last one. And that's it. I'm not going to promise you because, well, I'm weak and I love this stupid knowledge stuff and learning. So, but 99% sure, no more. All right. So, no more asking in the comments. Watch all the other states. Watch how I've done them, and you guys can do the same things for yourselves. All right. But I just found that Alaska as a little whim. I was just curious. I had to peek around the corner, you know, and Alaska looks a little interesting. So let's take a look. Yep, I'm grubby. Can't say the man in black. Can't say the international man of mystery. You know who I am. So take me as I am. Isn't it a song? Take me as I am. Something like that. All right, let's get into it. As always, guys, hit that bell, like, subscribe. Welcome to the tribe. The truth will not be denied. So let's get into it. So weak. So weak. All right, let's take a look. Back it up a little bit for you guys. All right, so I'll write the Travel Alaska Edition 2025. I swear my AI is getting a little smarter every time I reprogram it to do, with new stuff. So remember, if you guys want the programming copy paste sheet, go to blacksite32.com or else jamesclovett.com and look on there for the Chat GPT AI script. You will not be sorry. If you don't know who I am, you should probably fucks with me because I be delivering the goodies, the tea, the get down. And also, if you want to join me on my other YouTube channel, which if you're on here, help me with that one as well. It's probably way more entertaining. That's Badwolf Unrestricted. All right, so let's get on with it. Me. La, 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 la. Okay, sorry. Voice. All right, so it says why Alaska is more like a federal location than a state. So right out of the gate, the chat, because of how I have it programmed, is already like, hey, I used all your metrics. I ran in Alaska, and I'm just going to let you know it's more of like a federal location than a state. So let's see what it's got to say. It says over 60% of Alaska's federally owned land. Alaska also has tribal territories and as a Native American, corporations. Alaska entered the Union under Statehood Act with federal reservations. The vast majority of Alaska's roads are federal highways or federal funding corridors, which makes travel federally protected, meaning even more so. So now it wants to take a look at Alaska Statute Title 28 under motor vehicles. Motor vehicle, a vehicle which is self-propelled except a vehicle moved by human or animal power. Well, I don't know if I'd really call a vehicle moved by animal power a motor vehicle, but it does say except. All right. So missing, it has no commercial qualifiers. But see, what we know is that these words are already commercial. If they really wanted to make it so that what they're talking about here is not commercial, they would have to say they'd have to create a section in their code saying non-commercial section, non-commercial statutes, or motor vehicle, commercial. But what they do is these words are commercial. These are commercial terms. They all adopted them. Even if the state doesn't realize that's what they did. They cannot say a motor vehicle is the same thing as an automobile, even though we're both talking about a car. A car labeled a motor vehicle is regarded as a commercial instrument because the owner of the vehicle, either the state or the government or the person, have registered it to the corporation. If it's not registered to it or you remove it from there, it goes back to being an automobile, or it always was. Driver, commercial term, operate, license, resident, or they resed your identity, or they recited the entity. Alaska does not regulate non-resident private automobiles. Many states have, lowercase s, explicit non-resident travel exemptions. Alaska does not. So this blew me away right out of the gate. I mean, I think it's like the first one that it's ever said it doesn't have any non-resident automobile regulations. I mean, nothing. So let's see what else it found though. I told it to try on all the different levels. Alaska's unique native sovereign limits it limits state power. So in other words, the federal is more in control here than anything else. So there's federally recognized tribes, tribal courts, tribal police, native corporations, land held in tribal trust, jurisdiction, complexities rivaling Hawaii. So Alaska and Hawaii are very different. Very different. Maybe we should all move there and then make it easier to do right to travel. Except Alaska ends up what? I think it's like what? 200 to 1,000 people or something crazy go missing every year there. Yeah, I'll take my chances over here. Um, in these areas, state police often have no jurisdiction. So the state police they already know. They're like, yeah, you're probably private or whatever. So they see you coming, they're gonna be like, yeah, I'm not even gonna bother. Tribal sovereignty supersedes Alaska's civil authority. So the tribes are basically running that whole shebang bang. And the government is just like, yeah, do whatever you want, just don't mess up the place. We've got more to deal with all these damn missing people. So federal supremacy is automatic. Private nationals can claim immunity from the state commercial statutes because there really isn't much. Alaska Supreme Court also recognized travel rights, liberty of movement, property rights, due process before restriction, federal supremacy on interstate travel. They've got some examples of recognized due process limits on state police power, strong recognition of personal freedoms and limitations on state intrusion. Go Alaska. Okay. Okay, you're not engaged in commerce, you're not transporting goods or passengers for hire, traveling in the private, non-domestic. It's an automobile, not a motor vehicle. Do not try to argue that. Just have all of your stuff like normal, ready. Make sure the DMV has a record of your foreign entity, your non-resident as owner. But yeah, look at this, Section 8. I can now draft for you those documents I was talking about, plus more. But that's it. I mean, they literally don't. I mean, I'm going to ask it again, but it literally does not have any state legislature on non-resident. So I'm going to ask it again. I mean, it's already programmed to do this, but okay. So really, there is no state of Alaska legislature on non-resident registration, exempt vehicles, private vehicles, non-dash resident vehicle registration, um, private or international vehicle registration. Um, uh, in any form? I mean, in any legis, court, etc. It says, good question. No. My earlier statement that Alaska had no statute for non-resident private vehicle operation, non-resident registration was too broad. After checking the actual law, there are statutes in Alaska that address non-resident registration and exceptions for non-resident, non-commercial. That said, there are still important gaps in this limitation. Okay, so once again, had to force it a little bit. I mean, I was like, come on, there's got to be at least a little something. All right. So, what Alaska statutes do provide non-resident exempt vehicle law. Okay. Now I'm gonna have it read it because she tried to trick me a little.
Non-resident owner of a non-commercial vehicle registered outside the state is exempt from Alaska registration for 60 days after entry, provided the vehicle keeps valid out-of-state plates.
Okay, so let's break this down. So underneath Alaska Code 28.10.121 provides that a non-resident owner of a non-commercial vehicle that's registered outside of the state is exempt from Alaska registration. Now here it says for 60 days after entry, but what does this really mean legally? After entry. Notice how it doesn't say is in Alaska state's geographical area. We heard it talking about federal domination. So understand the different jurisdictions that are going on here. You've got the private republic, which is the Alaska state, Alaskans. You've got the state of Alaska. You've got the federal territory that is Alaska. And you've got the natives who are dominant there. This says entry just after entry into what? They want you to assume they mean the minute you cross the border. That is not so. A non-resident owner, which is your trust or your government or your entity, of a non-commercial vehicle. Listen to what it's saying. This statute provides that a non-resident owner, okay, who owns a what? Non-commercial vehicle. The vehicle registered outside of the state, so that vehicle, lowercase s, so this means all of the variations of states, which includes your trust or your government or your, FBO, 508c1a, etc., is exempt from Alaska regulations. Here they mean the state of Alaska. for 60 days. Now, really, there should be a comma after entry, but they put it all together. At least this is how I'm reading it. Okay. So you're exempt from Alaska registration for 60 days after entry. So they're saying when I enter something, but what am I entering? Now, we know that the full definition of the people who are doing the statutes is the state of Alaska, not Alaska state. I'm not entering the state of Alaska because that's on paper, cleverly written here. Simplistic, but clever. They always have to give you a way out. You can drive, well, I don't recommend driving, I recommend traveling. You can travel across Alaska's state line because you're entering into Alaska state. Those roads are for everybody, public and private use. They cannot force you to register. That is against the law. So what are they saying here? They're saying here that if you are a non-resident or your entity owns a non-commercial vehicle, you are exempt from Alaska registration for 60 days after you enter their paper corporation. Otherwise, this code states that you are exempt. You only have to register after 60 days of entering into their commercial world. Dash, provided the vehicle keeps valid out-of-state plates. So they're saying if you don't have valid out-of-state plates and you enter into their world, you must then register your vehicle within 60 days. Now, if you want to be, you know what? I won't give that part away. It's in my paid video on jamesclovett.com if you want to know other points you can argue. But this is the code. You're exempt. They're also basically saying here, as long as you keep valid out-of-state plates, you're exempt. But the moment you enter and do business or do anything commercial, let's say you're there in your private vehicle and you're like, oh, I'm going to use my private travel vehicle here for, I don't know, DoorDash or Uber, which would probably be crazy as shit out there. Well, you've entered the state of Alaska at that point. You now have 60 days because you joined up and started doing Uber to conform and to change your non-resident ownership into a resident of theirs.
Plates. Justia law. Under that statute, if the person becomes employed in Alaska or takes action indicating intention to acquire residence, then they must comply with registration/licensing within 10 days.
So they're saying the same thing I just said, but more. They're saying under this statute, if the person, you could argue the word person, but we'll leave it alone, becomes employed, commercial military term, so inside, meaning going in, you're putting something on paper, you're going into a group or joining something, Alaska, state of, or you take such actions that indicate you have an intention to acquire residency, which is your declaration. You're starting to then become one of them. You must then comply with registration within 10 days. So it's kind of a net, but it's not a strong net. It's one that you can use to become one of them, but they can't really force you and say, well, you've done so many things. We're just going to consider you this. Well, that's forcing joinder, identity theft, fraud, coercion. So they write this hoping that nobody really sits down, interprets it, and then files a lawsuit against them. You're also not going to be making any friends, but yeah, you might make a couple bucks, but you got to spend some to sue them over it. You could also look at this and say this is void for vagueness. or mute due to being void or mute to being vague. There's interpretation here. By law, you have the right to challenge this. It's not super specific. The state's general DMV instructions confirm a non-resident may operate. So hold on, once again, they're trying to citizenize, they're trying to corporatize, they're trying to commercialize what you're doing. How so? Because they're using the word operate. Operate requires a license. So this is how they try to mix it up. A non-resident may operate commercial for profit a vehicle with a current registration from another state for 60 days. See what they're doing there? Key word here is operate. The registration statute AS 28.10.011 lists a vehicle of a non-resident under AS 28.10.121 as an exception to the requirement that every vehicle driven, this is for profit, moved, parked on a highway, be registered, thereby statutorily acknowledging that non-resident vehicles can operate without an Alaskan or Alaska registration for a limited period. So once again, you're exempt because if you admit that you're operating within Alaska, that requires a license. But if you're traveling as a non-resident, which they don't say that in here privately, that means that they don't have an exact statute over it, which means they cannot prosecute you on something that they cannot control. And they cannot limit your private travel. Only commercial and public. So you have to be careful in what words you use or that they're assuming. You have to remove the assumption. Implication: Alaska does have statutory regime for non-resident private vehicles who are visiting, at least for a limited time of 60 days. That means it is not true that Alaska entirely lacks any statutory provision for non-resident or out-of-state vehicle operations. This can be challenged. Why? Because all of the states gave up their sovereignty. You cannot tell me if I'm visiting this particular area in the private that because I'm a non-resident and I have a private vehicle and I'm visiting, that you can tell me how long I can visit the state. This is pretty risky for them to say something like this. If I was there and party to this, I would file a lawsuit if they try to bother me. Generally, are they going to try to do anything? No. But should they even have this written on the books? No. Because a non-resident private vehicle, which they talk about, everything over here is just non-resident owner, etc. But down here they say a non-resident private vehicle who are visiting can only visit for 60 days. You can't tell me I can visit or I cannot stay more than 60 days. That's a denial of my rights and privileges as a national under 8 U.S.C. 1503. So it goes on to say this means that it's not true that Alaska entirely lacks a statutory provision. Statutory provisions cannot regulate private anything unless you register it to them. And if I'm private, my vehicle's private, you can't touch, say, shiz it to me. So this is pretty risky for them, in my opinion. And once again, they cannot regulate the private. Now, technically, a private person, which is different than a private citizen is a state citizen. A private person is somebody who's in the public, but they're more so private. So I would argue this all day, beat them, and then follow up with a lawsuit. if they try to use this against me. Remember, the our rights clearly state that anywhere where they infringe on your privacy and your rights is a violation to federal law. Okay. So here it says, but the statute still has key limitations and gaps open for challenge. So despite these, here's how it would argue some of these points. I'm going to let it read because I know you guys like her voice better than mine.
The statutes are clearly time limited, 60-day exemption for non-residents. Long-term private nationals, or frequent travelers, fall under residency/registration requirement once they employ, reside, or take action indicating intention to acquire residence.
So these things only apply for public things. So once again, it's a kind of a tricky thing they're saying here. They're saying, look, if you're a non-resident with a private vehicle, and here the AI does not have the whole section. She shortcutted it because she knows what I like. But here she goes on to say, these only apply as a private person in private vehicle, or excuse me, private citizen in private vehicle, once you employ. So if you're there for longer than 60 days and you take a job there and you're employed, well, hey, you're starting to do commerce. You say you reside there, you get a bank account. Hey, we need proof of residency. You're starting to, yes, you're getting it. You're starting to form joinder. You're starting to form nexus. You take action that indicates that you're trying to reside commercially in the public. Now, could you be there, buy a property, use your vehicle privately, buy some property and put that into a private trust, irrevocable one, and then this doesn't apply to you? Yes. Because you're not publicly employed, you're not trying to reside and register your property, you're not taking action to indicate that you're having a on the public side residence.
Residence. Justia Law +1. The exemption applies only to non-commercial, non-resident vehicles registered elsewhere. That means as soon as the state asserts residency, registration becomes mandatory. The broader definitions of motor vehicle, driver, operator remain broad, vague, and unqualified by commerce in ways that you can challenge under organic law reasoning. For example, motor vehicle is self-propelled and vehicle is a device by which persons or property may be transported. The code does not meaningfully define private traveler, foreign private vehicle, or non-domestic vehicle. Nor does it appear to distinguish between ordinary private travel and transportation, commerce. If you claim long-term non-domestic/foreign private conveyance, or assert non-resident status indefinitely under organic/private law rather than state domicile, those statutory exemptions become extremely narrow, or non-existent.
Basically, that's exactly what I just said. So she goes on here to say how you can, kind of manipulate certain things, make sure you keep your stuff, you out yourself out of their jurisdiction. But that's it. Not a terrible amount of information, which once again, they cannot prosecute by law because the separation of the Powers Act, legislation, executor, and judicial, okay, branches. If a cop arrests or writes you a ticket, there has to be a legislation for it. That then has to come together and then it gets adjudicated or judged. But if there's nothing here, he cannot write you a ticket close enough. That doesn't work. It has to be accurate to the event. So if they don't have a law on it and he writes you a bogus ticket, you can actually sue them for that. And the ticket is void and the court case must be dismissed. If he's like, well, I'm going to put miscellaneous. Nope. I'm going to put another statute that's close. Nope. They don't have a legislative code defining foreign travel, private vehicle, private international vehicle, private international or international registration, foreign national, non-resident vehicle, non-resident registration, all those different exempt private vehicles. They only have the one, which is fine. But even that one that they do have doesn't go into full detail and gives you the exemption. It says it right in it. It says after entry. It doesn't say entry into the geographical or physical state. It just says entry. And who wrote those? The state of Alaska. How do we get into the state of Alaska? It's not just crossing the border, it's being on paper in their system. If they can't find you in their system, they can't write you a ticket. And your entity, if you're doing them right and following me, you should not be registering them to the state or to the federal government, really, but especially not the state. Federal government really doesn't want you to register anything to them except for like what you need to in the so it's the state that wants you to do it. Once again, state of Alaska, they want that money. Federal government, they're there to give us and protect our freedoms. The states don't give a rat's ass about your freedoms. They want it all. Money, cash, hoes, and draws. They're gonna try to get it all. So if they cannot find your entity, they can't say, "Oh, well, you're breaking some kind of law. I'm just going to give you a ticket, or I'm just going to arrest you without a ticket." Nope, sorry, can't do that either. It's not legal, nor is it lawful. Rights violations across the board. Lawsuit time. That's it. Time for me to ho 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 because it's the holidays. All right, guys, that's it. Matter of fact, it is starting to snow, so I may have to get out there and do my dom ting. So be safe out there. If you guys are gonna shovel or whatever else, be out there. Anything, even if you're just moving furniture or boxes, stretch, drink water. You don't want to pull a hammy or something like that. Warm the body up. Get moving a little bit. Stretch. In high school, we used to every morning. Oh my God! Uh. It helps the body to get the blood flowing so that the heart doesn't have an instant or unexpected demand that it cannot keep up with. And knowing is half the battle. So stay safe, stay healthy out there. Appreciate you guys. Wolf's out. Bad wolf. Talk to you later.